Hello and welcome to the Museum Goer podcast. I'm Dave Walker. For today's episode, I visited the Southern Food and Beverage Museum at 1504 Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard in New Orleans to tour their new exhibition, The Natural Port, a look at New Orleans coffee culture. I was joined by Liz Williams, who is founder of the museum, a podcaster and prolific author, as well as Isabella Bentz, who is creative director and designed the exhibition. We looked at some objects and talked about the history, and I learned quite a bit about the story of coffee in New Orleans, which is as old as the city itself, maybe older. Anyway, it was a good walk and talk, and I encourage you to go see the exhibit, which is on view through October 28th. Let's start a little bit about the formation, about how the idea came about to explain New Orleans as a coffee capital.
Okay. Well, we decided to do it because you know, it kind of rubs you the wrong way that everyone thinks of Seattle as the coffee capital of America, when we have been importing coffee into the port of New Orleans since the 18th century. And so if you think 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, 21st century, not 400 years, but within 4 centuries, we have been importing coffee. And you know, it's just this quiet thing that we know, but nobody else knows. And there are such wonderful old businesses here that are just family businesses that are hundreds of years old because of that, importing green coffee. And just it's exciting to know that there's that kind of continuity here, and we have a great coffee culture that's developed because of it. So we decided we needed to celebrate it and inform people as they came through.
That's wonderful. And the thing that I noticed from the very first weeks after we moved here is that it's, even if you don't drink coffee, it's part of the atmosphere.
That's
I mean,
right.
we can smell, there's a roaster near our house, I don't know where it is, but that's an amazing sort of dimension.
Yes.
I think.
Yes. And I remember even as a child, just driving in the car, and then you all of a sudden smell coffee because you were passing a roaster somewhere. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the formation of an exhibit like this, is there good research? Is there good scholarship about New Orleans and the coffee trade?
There really is. There's actual scholarship. There's research you can do at places like the Port of New Orleans and in their archives, but also because it was such a unique thing through the years that writers just culturally have written about it. So Mark Twain talked about drinking coffee in New Orleans, and other people have talked about how you can't do business in New Orleans unless you do it over a cup of coffee. And so you get that kind of aspect also, which I think is also terrific.
When did the idea first hatch? How long have you been working on this?
So we have been working on this for about 3 months, do you think? Maybe 4 months, 3 or 4 months.
I would say probably 4 months.
And we first had the idea to do it last September during the first coffee festival. But then, you know, in earnest, design and all of that started to really come together about 4 months ago.
And there's a festival at the end of
September this year.
September,
Yes,
okay.
it'll
And,
be the second annual
right.
festival.
And this exhibit or the SoFAB will have a presence?
Yes, we will have a presence there. Part of this exhibit is going to go there. So this exhibit will be up until the middle of October. So even though we started this early, we're going to have all of our celebrations, our major celebrations, at the end of the time that it's up. So we'll celebrate the exhibit's successful run and taking it down, as opposed to celebrating the beginning.
Great. Before we go and do the walkthrough, is there anything that you learned, either of you, in the research and in putting the exhibition together? Anything that surprised you, or?
Well, this is something I had researched coffee once before, So I learned it that first time, though. So this was something I did learn in the research, but not literally for this exhibit. And that is one of the things that I believe explains why we can drink so much coffee. And that is, number one, we use chicory. And the chicory proportion is about 1/3 chicory to 2/3 coffee. So right there, you cut 1/3 of the caffeine out of the coffee. The second thing is that the more you roast coffee, the darker it is, and we seem to prefer a dark roast, the more the heat destroys the caffeine in the bean. Now that's counterintuitive because you think it's thick and dark, it must be more potent. It is more potent in flavor, but it is less potent in caffeine. So here you are destroying the caffeine, and so you have a reduced amount of caffeine. It's not no caffeine, but it's a hugely reduced amount of caffeine in the beans, in the dark roast. And then you mix 1/3 of it with chicory, so you have a very low caffeinated drink. And that means that you can drink a cup after cup after cup in a way that you can't do if you have a light roast, like Maxwell House used to be this very light roast. That has much more caffeine in it. And today, I think kids, especially kids, young people, are drinking coffee for caffeine. And so they want a light roast. And so if you go to some of these really modern coffee houses, that's what you find. A light roast is the predominant roast. And that's because people want caffeine. And they want a pick-me-up, they want a caffeinated drink. Whereas our drink, I don't think it was ever intentional. I don't think that this was something that was done to reduce the caffeine, but it was done to increase flavor, and therefore it simply had the secondary effect of reducing the caffeine. So when you're drinking our coffee, you can keep drinking it and don't have those effects of people get the jitters and all of that from drinking coffee. And that made a coffee culture a different thing than people seeking caffeine. It meant you could sit down, have a relaxed cup of coffee, chat with somebody, have another one if you're having a nice time, and you don't leave going crazy.
Right, and there's that whole point about there was no, many early days, there was really no business done unless it was over a cup of coffee.
That's right.
And that early man and women could handle it because of this interesting, almost counterintuitive.
Yes. And so that's what I learned in researching coffee that I absolutely didn't know, and nobody says anywhere that that's why a coffee culture can develop. That's me saying that because I think it makes sense. So, but you can find lots and lots of writing about the lack of caffeine because of the dark roast.
Interesting. Well, let's walk in.
Okay.
So let me ask a little bit about the history, and then we'll talk about the design and the design challenges. And I didn't know the opening fact that the first coffee beans probably arrived in the 1700s from the Caribbean. That's an amazing period of time.
Yes.
And it makes sense that the port, even then, would be the place.
Yes, that's why they called it the natural port.
Right.
We didn't call it that. It's written everywhere. New Orleans is the natural port to receive coffee. So starting in the Caribbean, where it was first planted, coffee started to come into New Orleans because it was the natural port to bring it into the U.S. or to America. And then started to be planted again because it was so successful in Central America. And then still the natural port was New Orleans. And then the northern part of South America is where it kind of stopped. And the natural port is still New Orleans. And so that's why it came through here.
How long did it take for all the subsidiary industry to develop, or did that happen right away? Did the incoming amount of coffee early in the 19th century
No,
built
in
up?
the early part of the 1700s. Is that what you're talking? No,
Not
you
that,
want to
wouldn't
get
be that early. A little
okay,
bit later.
all right.
Probably.
Okay.
But at some point, all of these other businesses had, joined this input of coffee, and then that's what really became, and that's still that way today.
So I believe that in the 18th century, what you had was resellers. So you brought in the green coffee, and then it was resold. So you either, and in those days, there weren't really roasters. You didn't buy your coffee roasted. You had your own, you roasted it yourself. So you were buying green coffee as individuals or businesses or whatever. So a coffee house might be roasting a lot, but they bought it green. So we had a lot of resellers who were shipping to the north in the 18th century. And then as people started to buy already roasted coffee, roasters developed in the 19th century.
I see. Okay. So, if you could talk a little bit about your process in synthesizing all of this history and then assembling it into something that can be consumed as information.
Yeah, no, it was at the beginning, it was kind of a lot to take on, also because I didn't know much about coffee history, and so kind of categorizing everything from a design standpoint where you can walk through the exhibit and everything kind of makes sense was something that took a lot of preliminary thought on my part. But I'm also very blessed that we work very closely with Bloomberg Philanthropies on their Bloomberg Connects digital guide. So basically it's an app that has guides with museums and galleries and different things all over the world. And so we have a pretty heavy digital component of this exhibit too.
And we have a QR code up there that'll take you right there.
I will do that when we're done. Tell me more about that and how you got to, from the beginning, incorporate this digital thing, and I assume that will live on.
No, it will, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Which
okay.
is also another thing that's really exciting about it. And it kind of creates a more, the word that's coming to mind is 3D, but of course it's not 3D, but a more immersive experience when you're walking through the guide. So basically we were able to record a lot more information than what's just on the walls. So I got some fantastic stories from Liz, and now we're working on getting more stories from different people involved in the coffee industry in New Orleans. And so we're kind of amassing this really exciting first-person account of the current coffee state of coffee in New Orleans.
So it's an offshoot of the exhibit, even though it's not physically here, that is basically collecting oral histories about this topic. And we've kind of decided that all of our exhibits are going to be that way in the future, so that we'll have oral history collection as a part of the exhibits being up for the future.
That's a wonderful idea, and also a way to, so a lot of times exhibits in museums, take years to put together. They're on the walls for a period of time, and some museums can do catalogs and do that kind of thing, but the idea of having a digital way to relate to all of this information, fabulous. Keeps it going. So let's start here.
Oh, that's okay.
And you needed to make a few points, like to the visitor right away.
Yes.
And how did you think about organizing this?
Well, I think one of my favorite parts of this exhibit are the quotes. And so the quotes are present in this kind of opening text that we see here, and I really wanted it to be sort of not overbearing but big when you come in and come into this space. In the past, I've kind of used a different approach to the beginning of the exhibits. But anyway, so we have this opening text here, but we also, you'll see we have Cajun coffee to the left of it. And that's because we wanted to give it its own moment, so to speak. It is such an important part of, the coffee is such an important part of Cajun culture, but it's also kind of actualized itself in a different way than it does with the other things that we've referred to later on in the process. And so I really just wanted, there's so much more than what's covered here in this physical space about coffee in New Orleans, but we tried to highlight some main points for people. Some, like, the Cafe Brûlot is just an exciting thing to watch and tastes fantastic, and that's why we tried to put it, you know, in its own space right next to a video of how to create Cafe Brûlots.
Yeah, we need to. Did you see the video?
Yes, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes. No, it's really cool. It's a great video.
It's wonderful, and it's one of those experiences like Cafe Du Monde, and it's one of those New Orleans, only sort of in New Orleans experiences that people indulge in and remember and take with them. And I'll say, I had no idea about Cajun coffee. So first minute of being in the exhibit, I learned something completely new to me, and I didn't know that there was a culture like that, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and it's also very interesting because here in New Orleans, you know, you have a distinction between Cajun people and Creole people, and most of the people who come into our museum are tourists, and they're from outside of New Orleans. And whenever I'm giving a tour, that's one of the things that I ask: who knows the difference? But there is a really interesting and beautiful distinction there. Although we all live in Louisiana, we all drink coffee, you know, there's a nuance, and I wanted that to be one of the things that you walk away with. Because you can't really trust that everyone's going to read everything in an exhibit.
Right, right. But the introduction really achieves what your goals were for it.
Thank you.
First of all, let me pause for a second and ask how you take your coffee, each of you.
All right, I drink coffee and chicory. In the morning, I drink coffee and chicory with milk, and that's morning coffee. But I also remember that I'm half Sicilian, and my grandmother had a rule that you didn't put you didn't put milk in coffee after like 11 o'clock in the morning. Then it was like no milk in coffee. So in the evening, I still drink coffee. I drink black coffee in the evening, just because it's sort of like, obviously nobody's keeping me from putting milk in it. But and I don't drink chicory. I drink pure coffee at night because I like milk and chicory together. So at night I drink pure coffee. It's still dark roast.
And how about you?
To be completely honest, I drink my coffee however it's given to me. But I do just drink it black usually when I like a dark roast, and I like drinking it black. I also like coffee with chicory. That's one of the, I am not from here. I moved here about 6 years ago. So I'm still getting used to coffee and chicory, but the more that we worked on this special coffee blend with Congregation Coffee, and so that was a really special experience because I was able to actually go to a cupping and perform one pretty much, and we got to decide on what the blend was going to be and how it was going to taste, and we actually sell it now. It's really cool. It's called the Dryads Blend. Just to pay homage to the history of this building, actually, which used to be the Dryads Market for a very long time. And so that was a really special experience. So now I drink our coffee and chicory, but other than that, I'm not as particular.
So the coffee in this special batch is not chicory coffee. It's just a regular, or does it have chicory?
Oh, our blend is coffee and chicory.
Oh,
yes.
no kidding. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, let's go talk about chicory over here.
Cool.
Second big learning was that at one point chicory became more expensive than coffee, which is hilarious to me because everyone knows that it was used at different times to sort of stretch
Right.
the product. That's fascinating.
But it's also true that in France, chicory grows wild along the roads and whatever. So people were able to collect chicory for free to stretch their coffee. And there was a time in which there was an embargo where the English were keeping the French from getting coffee, and so they were stretching their coffee because they were running out, and it was very hard to get. It had to be smuggled in. Not smuggled against the French, but against the English. And so they developed coffee and chicory there. We didn't develop coffee and chicory. And so then when it came here, people had developed a taste. So it wasn't, in the beginning here, it wasn't so much because it was a way to stretch the coffee. It was just the way you drank mocha somewhere and you liked it, and you said, oh, well, we'll just keep doing that. That's the way it became. And so you grow up drinking it, and so you drink it. It's not because you're trying to stretch your coffee. And that's the thing that people get confused about when you talk about stretching your coffee during the Civil War and all of that sort of thing. Yes, there were many, many places in the whole South where chicory was used to stretch coffee during the Civil War. And it was because you needed to stretch your coffee. But here, it really didn't start that way because it was brought over. Even though it started that way in France, by the time it came here, it was just a taste, an acquired taste.
And one that spread from the French population to the rest of the population.
The rest of the people who lived here,
Right.
yes.
Right.
Yes. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing too, that like I always tell people when I do my tours that it is not adulterated coffee. It is its own flavor. Just like mocha is its own flavor. And don't think of it as something that's like lesser. It's just different, but equivalent.
And it's great with milk.
Yes, it's definitely good.
That's all part of the experience.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the objects. Are these things that were in the collection? For example, is this a
A grinder.
Yeah, a grinder.
So the grinders were, the smaller grinders were in the collection. This is on loan from Community Coffee. And so is the cupping table and all the cupping accoutrement. But this, which I think is really wonderful, which is a home roaster, and you would use coals from the fire to, you take this out and put the coals in, and then this heats up and keeps the coffee hot and warm, and you turn it, and it has vents in it, and then when it's appropriately brown or black or however dark you want it, you take it away and you open it up and dump out your coffee beans.
And it would have to be tended, I assume, like turned
Yes, exactly.
over time, and probably not something indoors.
But you could do this, you would do it at the fireplace on the hearth.
Oh, I see.
So you could do it indoors if you had an indoor kitchen.
Right.
But it was easier to do a batch this way than in a cast iron skillet or something, which would have been the other way they would have done it. And this way you can just put a whole lot in there.
And is this from the collection?
Yes, this is ours.
Do you remember how you acquired it?
Yes, I do. Someone had it in an antique shop, and nobody wanted it. And they were moving to another location, and so they said, we're not going to take this with us. We're just going to give it to you.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And a great artifact.
Yes, it's wonderful.
It tells a story. That's cool. And so let's talk quickly about, not quickly, leisurely, about Café Brûlot. And because this is really an important permutation of the coffee
That's right.
rights.
Right. So, Café Brûlot is something, of course, there was a trend in France, and when was it Jules Alciator who went back to France after Antoine? Jules was Antoine's son, and he was sent to France to study in restaurants there. And at that time, there were, Irish coffee and other kind of flaming drinks were popular in France. And so he brought back this idea of having a flaming drink, and then he made it a New Orleans drink by using coffee here. And so by putting orange and all of the other spices that he put into it, and cognac, it became a New Orleans drink. And of course they made it tableside, so it was very flamboyant, and it's the kind of thing that you say, I want what he's having, kind of.
And the orange is like the brilliant note in the drink.
That's right.
To me,
it really is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And tell me about the video. Is it from a TV series? What do they talk about?
It's from Dale DeGroff, and he has a series of as a bartender of all the various drinks that you can make, and Café Brûlot is one of them. And he gave us permission to use his film. And it's from Cocktail King. Did you see Dale?
The video is also on our digital
Hi,
guide.
my name is Dale DeGroff, and now we get to actually make the Café Brûlot. First thing I have to do is the fuel. The fuel is
great.
one.
What else would you like a potential visitor to know about the exhibit and anything that I didn't ask?
So we have, growing in our garden, a chicory plant. And so I want to let people know, if they've never seen a chicory plant, that they can step out into our garden and see one. And I think most people wouldn't have seen a chicory plant. So that's something that I think is important to know. And so what do you think is really important?
I think just seeing the depth of coffee in New Orleans, I think that's just an important impression to make on people. Like, people coming to New Orleans, they know about Café du Monde, and they know about different, very different things about New Orleans, but why do they serve coffee and chicory in Café du Monde when they don't have to? Or why do they, or looking at the different brands of coffee that are in New Orleans. Folgers, it's not in New Orleans, but Louisiana. Just being able to see this breadth and depth, I think is going to make a lasting impression on people.
And I think she's absolutely right about Folgers. Here you have a company that probably serves many, many households in the United States. All of their roasting is done here in New Orleans. They actually had a Kansas City roasting facility that they closed and brought to New Orleans because all the co-packing, they co-package a lot of other brands. All of that is done here in New Orleans. And people probably aren't aware of that. And
it is a little bit of a kept secret. I mean, you don't know about that campus unless you're on the river. The only time I've ever seen it was when we went on one of the boat rides downriver to see that. And that's the campus we're talking about, right?
So it's right off of Old Chef Notour Highway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And
well,
it didn't flood during Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, it didn't, because it's.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was the? I know that sometimes designers, curators lurk and observe. Have you noticed how people are consuming this exhibit? And is there anything that's interesting or surprising?
So, yesterday was the preview, and today is the first day. So, I think that people, the first question they ask is, why is there a coffee exhibit in New Orleans? And so I have seen people start to read about it and seem to be surprised. Because I think Seattle just did such a great job of branding themselves as the coffee capital that the idea that something could have existed even before Seattle is just really hard.
I'm sure that's for a lot of people, that's true. Well, this was terrific. I got just what I needed, so thank you. Thank you to Liz and Isabella for showing me around the Natural Port, a look at New Orleans coffee culture, on view now at the Southern Food and Beverage Museum on Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard in New Orleans. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to take a look at themuseumgoer.com, where there are blog posts, free email newsletter sign up, and lots of links. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Bye.